Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into something pretty unsettling, really. The ransomware attack that hit Blue Yonder.
Yeah, and what's got everyone on edge is how this attack, it really shows us just how fragile the supply chain is,
Right.
how it can impact us all directly.
You got it. This isn't some techie problem happening in the background. It's going to determine what we see, what's available, on store shelves. And for anyone who might not be familiar with Blue Yonder, they're the ones behind the software, the brains, for huge EE companies to manage their supply chains,
Hmm.
like Starbucks, big grocery chains, names we all know.
And with the holidays right around the corner, well, let's just say the timing could be better. This is going to have a ripple effect for a lot of people.
All right, so paint us a picture.
Right.
When did this attack first pop up and how did things go down?
Well, the first sign of trouble, the breach, they detected that on November 21st, so just last week, really. Blue Yonder, to their credit, they got right on it, brought in the cybersecurity experts to see what was what and contain the damage. Now, what's interesting here is that the ransomware, it zeroed in on their private cloud setup, not their public cloud services, the ones on Azure.
Hmm. So they had a specific target in mind. What does that tell us about how this attack went down?
Well, it points to something very deliberate, very targeted. It's possible they were looking for, weak spots, specific vulnerabilities within that private cloud environment. And it makes you think, what's different about security between private and public cloud setups? And what does that mean, really, for how companies protect themselves?
That's a really good point. And how fast did this disruption, how fast did it spread from there?
Like wildfire. Over 3,000 companies in 76 countries, they all use Blue Yonder software. We're talking a massive network here. And a lot of these are household names. You've got your big manufacturers like Procter& Gamble, Anheuser-Busch, Campbell's, big retailers, Best Buy, Wegmans, Walgreens, and of course the grocery giants, Albertsons, Kroger, all their subsidiaries too. The list just goes on.
Were there any names on that list that might surprise people?
Maybe the impact on like the drinks industry, like Anheuser-Busch, they lean heavily on Blue Yonder systems to manage, that huge distribution network they have. Any kind of disruption there. And it could be harder to find, I don't know, your favorite beer, especially with the holidays coming up.
So we're already seeing this thing play out in the real world. What are some of the biggest examples of that?
Well, you've got Starbucks. They've had to go, can you believe it, back to pen and paper for scheduling their employees. Imagine that, trying to manage thousands of stores without, the digital tools. And over in the UK, supermarkets like Morrisley's, they're looking at a possible 40% drop in what they can put on the shelves.
Wow, that's huge. What about some of the other UK supermarkets? Are they seeing the same kind of problems?
Sainsbury's are another big one over there. They've had to put their backup plan into action. But even with that, things are, well, they're not running smoothly. This isn't just a small hiccup. This is causing some major disruption in people's lives. And with the
Mhm.
holidays coming up, it's even more of a problem.
I can see why people are concerned. It seems like these cyber attacks, they almost always ramp up around the holidays. What's the reason for that?
It's unfortunate, but you're right. The holidays it's like the perfect storm for these attacks. You've got businesses running with fewer IT and security staff, makes them more vulnerable. Then you've got the huge spike in transactions, harder to spot the bad stuff and all that activity. And to top it off, companies are under immense pressure to, keep things running smoothly during their busiest time. That makes them way more likely to just pay the ransom.
So it's like a recipe for disaster, all these factors combined. Are there any numbers out there that show just how much more common these attacks are during the holidays?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We see about a 30% increase in ransomware attempts during the holidays compared to the rest of the year. And get this, specifically during November and December, it jumps by a crazy 70%.
70%, that's a massive jump. What is it about November and December that makes them so appealing to these cyber criminals?
Well, for one, a lot of companies, they actually cut back on their security staff by as much as 70% during the holidays. Budgets are tight and they think things will be quieter. But as we're seeing with this Blue Yonder situation, well, that assumption can really backfire. Plus, there's that pressure, that urgency to keep everything running for holiday shopping. That makes companies much more likely to give in to those ransom demands.
It's a tough position to be in for sure. So let's shift gears a little bit. How are companies dealing with this crisis? What kind of emergency measures are they taking?
Well, Blue Yonder, you got to hand it to them. They've been very open and upfront about everything. They've been keeping everyone updated, customers, the public, about what's happening and how they're trying to recover. When you communicate clearly, it builds trust, manages expectations. Then you have companies like Starbucks. They're coming up with manual workarounds, it shows they're able to adapt and they're committed to serving their customers no matter what. And some companies are using their backup systems, but it's a mixed bag, you know? Some are doing better than others.
Or some companies are better prepared than others.
Seems like it. Some have really strong backup systems that let them keep going, relatively smoothly, while others are having a much harder time. This whole thing really highlights the importance of having strong security, especially when it comes to those third-party vendors. You need to know you can trust them. And of course, having a plan B, a well-tested contingency plan, that's crucial.
You're right, because even if you have the best security in the world, if the companies you work with aren't as protected, well, you're still vulnerable. What are some of the big lessons, especially when it comes to these third-party vendors? What can other companies learn from this attack?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is you got to keep an eye on those vendors, see how they handle security. You need to know what they're doing with your data, how strong their security is, and what their plan is if something goes wrong, because their weakness becomes your weakness.
Makes perfect sense. So what can companies do, especially with the holidays right around the corner? What steps can they take to protect themselves based on what we've learned from this?
Well, one of the most important things is making sure you have enough people on the security team, even during the holidays. It might seem like an added expense, but it could save you from much bigger losses down the line. Another key thing is keeping an eye on those vendors we talked about. You got to know how they're handling your data and what their security setup is like. Because like we said, if they're weak, you're weak.
You keep saying keep an eye on. What should companies be looking for specifically?
You want to make sure they have good security policies, the rules and procedures, and that their employees are trained in security. They need to know what to look out for. And they have to have a clear plan in place if something happens, an incident response plan. Basically, you need to be comfortable with their overall commitment to security, how seriously they take it.
Sounds like it needs to be a real partnership, when it comes to security.
Exactly. You have to work together with those vendors, make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to protecting that data.
So it's a shared responsibility. What about investing in, like, the latest and greatest security tech? How important is that?
That's a must-have, no question. Investing in those more advanced security technologies, things like threat intelligence platforms, those SUM systems, and EDR solutions, those are key.
Could you break those down a little? I know SUM and EDR are really important, but not everyone might be familiar with, like, what they actually do.
Sure. A SAME system, it basically gathers and analyzes security data from all over your network. Helps you spot those threats faster and respond quicker, like having a central command for all your security operations. EDR, that focuses on the individual devices like laptops and servers, making sure they're protected, gives you a real-time view of what's happening on those devices and helps you catch and respond to any bad behavior.
So it's like a multi-layered approach, having all these different defenses.
That's the idea. The more layers you have, the harder it is for the bad guys to get through.
What other steps can companies take to minimize their risk?
Another big one is that incident response plan we talked about. You got to know what to do if and when an attack happens. If you have a plan that you've practiced, it can make a huge difference in how bad the damage is.
That's a great point. It's not just about trying to stop the attack. It's about being ready to deal with it if it does happen.
Exactly. You have to be able to spot those threats quickly and respond effectively so you minimize the damage. Every second counts.
And that's where having a dedicated cybersecurity team really comes in handy, right?
Absolutely. Having skilled professionals who can keep an eye on your systems, analyze those threats, and respond to incidents, that's essential. It's not something you can just leave to chance.
So if a company is listening to this and thinking, okay, we need to step up our game, what are some practical things they can do, like right away?
First things first, get a security assessment done. That'll show you where you're vulnerable and help you decide where to focus your efforts, your money, when it comes to security. Once you know where your weaknesses are, you can start putting the right safeguards in place to protect those areas. Could be anything from upgrading your tech to having stronger password rules to training your employees on security awareness. It's all about creating that multi-layered defense.
So it's about knowing your weak points and then building up your defenses around those.
Exactly. It could be anything from like upgrading your tech to having better passwords to teaching your employees about security. It's about creating that multi-layered defense, making it as hard as possible for those attackers to get in.
And it's not like you do it once and you're good.
Right.
This is an ongoing thing.
You got it. Security is not a destination, it's a journey. You have to keep adapting and changing things up to stay ahead of those threats because they never stop evolving.
Like a constant back and forth, you and those cyber criminals.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They're always coming up with new tricks, so we have to be just as creative on defense.
This all ties back to something you mentioned earlier about those third-party vendors and managing that risk. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. As companies rely more and more on those third-party vendors, they also open themselves up to more risk. It's simple math, really. If one of your vendors gets hit with a breach, well, it can directly impact your business too. So it's super important to vet those vendors really carefully, make sure they're taking security seriously, that they have strong practices in place.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do you go beyond just, checking a box on a form? What does it mean to really vet a vendor?
You have to really understand how they approach security, what their plan is if something happens, and their overall attitude towards security. It can't just be a surface level check. It's got to be a real partnership, working together to protect your data.
So it's a shared responsibility, not just something you can outsource and forget about.
Exactly. And it's something that everyone needs to take seriously, especially after what we've seen with Blue Yonder. If one of those third-party vendors gets breached, it can be disastrous. Disruptions, damage to your reputation, and potentially huge financial losses. It's just not a risk worth taking.
So it's much better to be safe than, invest in those strong third-party risk management practices from the get-go.
Absolutely. It's much cheaper to prevent a problem than it is to clean up the mess afterward.
And this is especially important during the holiday season, right? When everyone's already so busy and stressed.
Oh yeah, for sure. The holidays are prime time for cyber attacks. It's when companies are at their weakest and most likely to just pay the ransom to avoid any problems. Taking those extra precautions to protect your systems and your data, well, that's crucial.
So what are some specific things that companies can do to strengthen their defenses during the holidays?
Well, like we've been talking about, making sure you have enough people on your security team, even during the holidays, that's huge. It might be tempting to let everyone take time off, but you got to have someone watching those systems, ready to respond if something happens. You don't want to leave your business wide open just because it's the holiday season.
Don't skimp on security just because it's the holidays. I like that.
And be extra careful about those phishing scams. Cyber criminals, they love to take advantage of the holidays. They send out emails that look like they're from real businesses, trying to trick people into giving up their information.
Right, so everyone needs to be extra careful about clicking on links or opening attachments from people they don't know, especially during the holiday season.
Exactly. And if you're shopping online, make sure it's a secure website. Look for that padlock icon in the address bar and make sure the URL starts with HTTPS.
Those are great tips for everyone listening, whether you're a business or just shopping for yourself.
And companies need to talk to their employees about security, especially around the holidays. Make sure they know about the risks and what to do if they see something suspicious. Make them part of the solution.
So it's about creating a culture of security within the company where everyone's looking out for each other.
Exactly. Security is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT departments.
This has been a really great overview of cybersecurity and all the things we can learn from this Blue Yonder attack. Thanks for sharing your insights.
My pleasure. It's important to have these conversations and make sure people are aware of these issues. The big takeaway here is that cybersecurity isn't a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process. You got to stay alert, stay informed, and adapt to the changing threats out there.
It's a never-ending battle, but one we have to fight if we want to protect our businesses and our personal information.
Well said. And I think it's especially important to remember that during the holidays, when we might be letting our guard down a little, those cyber criminals, they're out there looking for any opportunity to exploit those weaknesses.
Good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the holiday spirit and forget about those things.
Exactly. So stay alert, be aware of the risks, and take those precautions to protect yourself and your business. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Okay, now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. In a world where technology is everywhere, how do we balance the convenience it brings with the need for security?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that's going to keep coming up as technology keeps evolving. There's no easy answer. But by talking about it, by staying informed, we can start making better decisions about the tech we use and how much risk we're willing to take.
It's all about being aware and making informed choices. We'll keep exploring these issues in future deep dives, so make sure you tune in.
Looking forward to it. There's always something new to learn in the world of cybersecurity.
All right, folks. That's it for part 1 of our 3-part deep dives into the Blue Yonder ransomware attack. Join us again next time as we dig deeper into this evolving situation and explore what it means for both businesses and consumers.
Until then, stay safe and stay informed. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think the first step is realizing that security, it's not just an IT thing, it's a business thing.
So what does that look like, really? How does that change, how a business approaches security?
It means making security part of everything the company does, from the top, the boardroom, all the way down to, the people loading the trucks. Everyone needs to understand their role in protecting the company's data, their systems. It's got to be a team effort.
So you're talking about creating a culture of security, not just leaving it all to the tech guys.
Exactly. It's got to be ingrained in everything. The policies, the procedures, the training, make sure everyone's ready to handle security, whatever their role is.
Makes sense. So it's not enough to just have the latest tech. It's about the processes, the right people in place.
You nailed it. Tech is important, don't get me wrong, but
Right.
it's just one piece of the puzzle. You got to have those solid policies, those procedures in place, and then you got to make sure everyone knows how to follow them. And of course, you need people who know what they're doing, who can stay ahead of the curve, because let's face it, the threats, they're always evolving.
So education, awareness, that's key. And what about having a plan, for when things go wrong? Because let's be real, sometimes they do.
Oh, absolutely. Having a clear incident response plan, that's critical. If you get hit with an attack, you need to know exactly what to do, who does what. It's not just about trying to prevent it, it's about being prepared.
So if it's about damage control,
Yeah, go.
minimizing the impact if something does get through those defenses.
Exactly. You have to be able to spot those threats fast, respond quickly and effectively so you limit the damage.
Okay, so let's say a company is listening to us right now and realizing, man, we're not where we need to be. What's the first thing they should do? Where do they even start?
Well, a good place to start is with a security assessment, like a checkup. That'll show you where you're vulnerable, where you need to focus your efforts and your resources. Once you know where those weak points are, you can start putting things in place to protect them.
It's about figuring out where you're weakest and then shoring up those defenses.
Exactly. It might mean upgrading your tech, maybe putting in stronger password rules, or training your employees on how to spot those phishing scams. It's about building up those layers of defense.
Like reinforcing the weakest links in the chain.
That's a great analogy. It's all about making it as hard as possible for those attackers to get in.
And I'm guessing this isn't a one-time thing, right? It's not like you do a security assessment and you're good to go forever.
You got it. Security is a journey. It's not a destination. You have to constantly be adapting, changing things up to stay ahead of those threats because they're always changing, always looking for new ways in.
It's like that game of cat and mouse, always trying to outsmart each other.
That's a great way to put it. The bad guys are always coming up with new tricks, so we have to be just as innovative on defense.
We talked about those third-party vendors earlier and how important it is to manage that risk. Can you explain a little more about what that means, why it's so important?
Sure. As businesses rely more and more on those outside vendors, those third-party companies, they also open themselves up to more risks. If one of those vendors has a breach, it can easily impact your business too.
Like that saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly. So you have to really vet those vendors carefully. Make sure they have strong security practices in place. And I'm not just talking about checking a box on a form. You have to really dig deep.
So what does that deep dive look like? What kind of questions should companies be asking those vendors?
You need to understand their approach to security, what their plan is if something goes wrong, and their overall commitment to security. It can't be surface level. It has to be a real partnership where you're working together to protect your data.
So it's a shared responsibility, not something you can just outsource and forget about.
Absolutely. And it's something that needs to be taken seriously, especially after what we saw with Blue Yonder. Those third-party breaches, they can be devastating. You could have your operations disrupted, your reputation damaged, you could lose millions of dollars. It's a risk you just can't afford to take.
So it's much better to be proactive, invest in those strong third-party risk management practices right from the beginning.
100%. It's always cheaper to prevent a problem than it is to fix it after the fact.
And this is especially important during the holidays, right? When everyone's already stretched thin and under a lot of pressure.
You're absolutely right. The holidays are prime time for these cyber attacks. It's when companies are most vulnerable, when they're most likely to just pay the ransom to avoid any disruption. So taking those extra steps to protect your systems and data, that's crucial during the holidays.
So what are a few specific things that companies can do to shore up their defenses, especially during the holiday season?
Well, we've talked about this, but making sure you have enough security staff on hand, even during the holidays, that's a big one. It might be tempting to let everyone take time off, but having someone monitoring your systems ready to respond if something happens, that's critical. You don't want to leave your business vulnerable just because it's the holidays.
Right, don't let your guard down just because it's the holidays. Makes sense.
Another thing is to be really careful about those phishing scams. Cybercriminals love to exploit the holidays. They send out emails that look like they're from legitimate businesses, hoping to trick people into giving up their personal information.
So watch out for those suspicious emails. Don't click on any links or open attachments from people you don't know, especially during the holidays.
Exactly. And if you're doing any online shopping, always make sure you're on a secure website.
Yeah.
Look for that padlock icon up in the address bar and make sure the website address starts with HTTPS. Those are good signs.
Those are good tips for everyone, whether you're a business owner or just doing some holiday shopping.
Definitely. And companies need to make sure they're communicating with their employees about security, especially during the holidays. Make sure everyone knows about the risks, what to look out for, and what to do if they see something suspicious. Get everyone involved. Make them part of the solution.
So it's about creating that culture of security like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Everyone has to be on board.
Exactly. Security is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT departments.
This has been a really insightful conversation, really helpful. Thanks for walking us through all this, helping us understand cybersecurity and what we can learn from what happened to Blue Yonder.
Happy to do it. These are important topics, and the more people who are aware of them, the better. The key takeaway here is that cybersecurity, it's not a one-and-done thing. It's an ongoing process. You have to stay vigilant, stay informed, and keep adapting to those ever-changing threats. It's a constant battle.
The fight we have to keep fighting if we want to protect our businesses, our personal information, really our whole way of life in this digital world.
Well said. And it's especially important to remember that during the holidays, when we all tend to relax a bit, those cybercriminals, they don't take a break. They're out there looking for any opportunity to take advantage of our distraction.
Good reminder. It's easy to forget about those things when you're caught up in the holiday spirit.
Exactly. So stay alert, be aware of the risks, take those precautions to protect yourself and your business. Better safe than sorry.
All right, before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. As technology becomes more and more integrated into our lives, how do we balance the convenience it offers with the need for security?
It's a tough question, and there are no easy answers.
It really is. It's a question we're all going to be grappling with more and more as technology continues to evolve. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. The right balance between convenience and security, it depends on your individual needs, your tolerance for risk. But it all starts with awareness, with understanding the risks and what you can do to minimize them. The more we know, the better decisions we can make.
Well said. It's definitely something to think about.
Now, join us for the final part of our deep dive into the Blue Yonder ransomware attack as we explore the wider impact of this incident and what it means for the future of supply chain security.
Looking forward to it.
All right, welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive on the Blue Yonder attack. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the immediate fallout to the bigger picture, what it means for cybersecurity as a whole.
It's been eye-opening, really. This whole thing shows just how interconnected everything is these days. Like one weak spot, one vulnerability in a software company, and it can cause huge problems across entire industries.
Absolutely. It really underscores how fragile, in a way, our global systems are. The same networks that let us trade seamlessly, communicate instantly, they also create those points of vulnerability, those entry points for attacks.
Like a domino effect. One thing falls, and it sets off this chain reaction.
Exactly. And this Blue Yonder attack, it's a perfect example. It's impacted manufacturers, retailers, consumers. It's global.
So with all that in mind, this interconnectedness, this potential for things to go wrong on such a large scale, what does this mean for supply chain security in the future? Were we headed towards a system that's more fragile or one that's more resilient?
Well, I think this whole incident is a wake-up call. It's forcing businesses, even governments, to really take a hard look at how they approach security. We can't just react to things anymore. We need to be proactive. We need to work together.
So less about building walls and more about building bridges.
You got it. We need to share information, best practices, resources. That's how we're going to strengthen those defenses, collectively. We can't afford to operate in silos anymore. A threat to one is a threat to all of us, really.
And that includes working closely with those third-party vendors we talked about earlier, right?
Couldn't be more important. Third-party risk management, It's more crucial now than ever before. We need to make sure that the companies we work with, our partners, that they're just as committed to security as we are. It's about building trust and accountability throughout that whole supply chain. That's key.
So it's not enough to secure your own systems. You have to make sure everyone in the network is secure.
Exactly. And that might mean investing in new technologies, new approaches. We have to be innovative. We have to stay ahead of the game, always thinking one step ahead.
So what are some of those new trends we're seeing in supply chain security? What's on the horizon?
Well, one of the most exciting things, really, is the use of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. These technologies can analyze massive amounts of data, and that helps us identify patterns, anomalies, things that might point to a threat, like having a digital detective constantly scanning the system.
So AI could help us catch those threats early on and respond more effectively.
That's the idea. It has the potential to completely change the game when it comes to security. Another area that's getting a lot of attention is blockchain technology.
Blockchain, yeah. I know it's the tech behind cryptocurrencies, but how does that apply to, like, supply chain security?
It's all about secure records, transparency. Blockchain lets you track transactions in a way that's incredibly difficult to tamper with. Like, imagine being able to trace a product's journey, from the factory all the way to the store shelf, and knowing for sure that the records are accurate, haven't been messed with.
So it's about building that trust, that transparency into the system itself.
That's it exactly. And that's what we need to be aiming for, really. A supply chain that's not only secure, but also resilient, something that can adapt, as the threats change.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what are the key takeaways? What's the most important thing our listeners should remember about this Blue Yonder attack and what it means going forward?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that cybersecurity, it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just an IT problem. It's a business problem, a societal problem. We all have to be aware of the risks and take steps to protect ourselves, our organizations. Everyone has a role to play.
So it's about being vigilant, taking those preventive measures we talked about, really making security a priority.
Exactly. And remember, those threats, they're always evolving. Cyber criminals are always coming up with new ways to attack. So we have to be just as innovative on defense. It's a constant back and forth.
Always learning, always adapting. Can't let our guard down.
Couldn't agree more. And this whole Blue Yonder situation, it really highlights the need for collaboration. We have to work together, share information, share resources if we're going to strengthen our defenses. A secure future, well, it depends on us working together.
It's about building a more secure, a more resilient world together.
Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been a fascinating look at the Blue Yonder attack and all the ripples it's created. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive and sharing your expertise.
It's been my pleasure. These are important conversations, and I hope this encourages our listeners to learn more, get involved in making the digital world a safer place.
Before we sign off, I want to leave everyone with one final thought. As we become more and more reliant on technology, we need to remember that security, it's not just about protecting our data, our systems. It's about protecting our way of life. It's about our freedom, our prosperity, our well-being.
Very well said. Security is the foundation, really, for everything we do in the digital world. Without it, well, we're building on shaky ground.
So let's all do our part to make that foundation strong. Thanks for listening, everyone, and until next time, stay safe and stay informed.